Hey there, fellow nerds and geeks. Aaron Nabus here, and on this episode of the Hall H Show podcast, we reconnect with one of my favorite comic book creators, well, just one of my favorite creatives, period, Stephan Franck at WonderCon 2018. He's always willing to make time for his fans, and his interviews are always fun and informative, so I appreciate him taking the time to talk with me, especially at a busy con like WonderCon. On this episode, we discuss his love for the noir genre, which is a huge influence on his comic book, Silver. We also touch on the Iron Giant panel that he did at WonderCon, especially the technical challenges of melding CG and traditional animation in the 90s. Speaking of melding, I think one reason why his Silver comic book has been so well received is that he has been able to meld film language into it. People are so used to watching movies that when you take movie storytelling approaches and apply them to sequential art, it just makes it so much easier to understand. Volume 4 of Silver, the last installment of a group of con men and a descendant of Van Helsing trying to steal treasure from a castle full of vampires, has a Kickstarter campaign going on until June 28th, 2018. Please check it out and consider supporting it. The whole series is just so beautifully well done. As an added bonus to this podcast, I have also included the audio from the Iron Giant panel. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Stephan Franck. If you are ever at a con, please make sure to check out his panels and go meet him in person at his Dark Planet Comics booth. We are here at WonderCon 2018. I'm joined by Mr. Stephan Franck. He just got finished with his panel about Iron Giants, a movie that he worked on. We were at his booth, and I sort of wanted to invite him on the Hall H Show podcast. He was on, I think it was at San Diego Comic-Con, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It was, so it's nice to see you again.
It's great to see you again. Thanks for having me on again.
First of all, I just want to say awesome job on the panel.
Thank you.
And I guess we'll talk about the panel really quick. We were talking a little bit earlier, and you said it was about the second time that you did it.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I noticed is that it's pretty much Q&A.
Yeah, I always feel like it's, those panels, whether it's instructional panels or just, things like behind-the-scene panels, I feel like people come in with a lot of questions that they've had maybe about the movie for a long time, and it's much better to just I basically give a basic setup, let people know how your movie kind of came to be and my involvement, how that came to be, and then I feel like most of what I have to say, I have the chance to say it answering people's questions, so at least I know they're getting what they're looking for from the panel.
Mm-hmm. And for those of our audience who don't know what your involvement was in Iron Giant, could you sort of maybe summarize it briefly?
Yeah, I was one of the supervising animators on the movie, so that was like an amazing learning experience for me, and a chance to work on probably one of the, in my mind at least, one of the best animated movies that were done, in recent years. So Definitely. I was extremely lucky for that.
Mm-hmm. And one of the questions that I noticed in the crowd, someone asked, well, a lot of people say that it's a movie that really touched them. It's the cornerstone of, not only the childhood, but the whole family. I know that heavy metal has a big influence on you. Now, is there a movie that sort of has that effect that Iron Giant has for them? Other than maybe heavy metal, but maybe something else?
Oh, for me, that has this effect on me?
Yeah.
I think I'm going to say the movie that I saw as a kid that captured my imagination maybe the most, more than anything else, was Blade Runner.
Oh, Blade Runner. Yeah. Okay, right. Yeah. That's a good one.
I always loved noir, as you know, from Silver,
Yeah.
And always loved sci-fi and Philip K. Dick and so like. And Ridley Scott's one of my favorite directors anyway. So like that movie captured my imagination really intensely.
Mm-hmm. There's a movement now. I know that in the animation world, you talked about in the panel that you guys were sort of learning as you go. There's one part where like the technical and then the sort of artistic were sort of melding together.
Yes.
Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
On Iron Giant?
Yeah.
It was very interesting because that's a movie that was done in the late 90s, right? So really CG as a tool for feature animation was really just sort of starting. I mean, Toy Story had come out and stuff, but it was just Pixar and, and so we had a lot of people who knew CG from the technical side, so they knew the tools really well, but they didn't necessarily understand film language or animation and stuff like that as well as we did, but at the same time, we didn't know the tools at all. So like very quickly, the two groups started working closely together, and everybody learned from everybody, and it was a really exciting time,
Yeah. Another important point that I thought about your panel was I was reminded about a podcast or an interview that Neil deGrasse Tyson was on, and he was talking about, when you're younger, kids, they're experimenting, and you shouldn't prohibit that.
Yes.
Even if they're banging on pots and pans, and you
could grow up to be the greatest drummer in the world.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned something about your light table when you were in the panel. About how you use the coffee table?
Yeah, when I was 6 years old, I stole the coffee table from the living room and dragged it up to my room to use as a light table to animate,
Yeah, so I thought that was really
an important point.
Yeah,
the important thing about that was that my dad, instead of saying like many dads, like, what are you doing? Bring this back to the living room, where I'm going to put my beer on, what I mean? No, he was like, well, you're all set up to do your work now, and I think if you can do that to for your kids, which is to recognize that maybe they have some work that defines them and that they have to do, and that is to be respected, that it's not a hobby or an outlet or a phase, it's just their work, and they're just that type of vocational people who have work to do from the moment they were born. Mm-hmm. You have to encourage it,
Is there anything that wasn't asked at the panel that you wish they would have asked?
No, I think it was a really great panel. I really enjoyed that. It was really about a lot that had to do with emotions and honesty, which I think at the end of the day is the most important thing, because that's everything else is just a means to that end, So I think it was very important. Sometimes in panels, people are more interested in depending on depending on where you would do something like this. Sometimes the questions get more technical and more kind of inside baseball, and that's great too. And I love to share it. But if it's a more general audience and they're really focused on the truth and honesty and emotional resonance of the movie, this is very important to me.
Mm-hmm. If the movie was to be made now, like what are some of the differences you might expect? You could maybe cover the technical aspect, or maybe there's some parts of the story that may be different.
Well, I mean, it's really, there's like two ways to take that question, right? Like the question is like, if just the same artists had the tools of today to do it, would they do it any different? And probably no. Like I don't. I mean, like specifically, maybe you'd use a different program to color the drawings or whatever. But it's not.
The feeling will be the same.
Right. The question is, would the industry let you make that movie now? Right.
Okay.
Or would they want to make it live action with a CG giant? Or would they make it all CG? Or what I mean? So maybe they would. Maybe you could imagine that this movie would be made today as a full CG movie, and I'm sure there would be a lot of artistic merits to it too. It'd be a different vibe, definitely. But if we were going to do a 2D, a 2D version of the, I think that one is pretty definitive. I don't think there's any like major changes in technology that would have you approach it really differently.
Mm-hmm. Your other panel deals with sort of using your experiences in the world of cinema and translating it into the comic book.
Right.
Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
I mean, what's interesting with the Iron Giant 2 was like how rooted in the love for comics that movie was. I worked in that sequence, like the comic book reading in the barn and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The fact that Brad also was in love with the spirit and stuff like that. So, I think at the end of the day, all the art forms are sort of merging today. I mean, we are now in this pop culture event at WonderCon where it's people who, games, TV, comics, it's all one thing, you're just following these worlds and these characters across all those forms of entertainment. And I think each form has independently evolved certain tools over the years, right? Like comics have evolved certain things, like the ability, for instance, to be weird and to do things that really push the presentation without breaking the reality of it. That's something that's really in comics, and that's only now, is bleeding into cinema with the Marvel movies and all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But meanwhile, movies have developed this form of visual storytelling known as film language.
Yeah.
That everybody in the world understands now as a second language, if not a first. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And if you can bring that into comics, which is kind of what I've been doing, because that's animation and film has been my career for a long time. Mm-hmm. Then you bring a level of accessibility to new readers to your comics that maybe people, I hear it every day. Oh, I love to read comics, but I can't get into it. I'm confused. I don't know where to go. Well, put just a little bit of this, a sense of film language in your comics, and people won't even question it. So it's just like all those art forms are converging. If everyone can learn from everybody else what they do well, then I think you're getting into some really powerful forms of communication.
For sure. I guess we can maybe talk a little bit about your comic book Silver, and on that point about converging, have the fans of your Iron Giant work sort of come and accepted, or have at least taken a look at your Silver comic book, and how's the acceptance of that?
It's great. I mean, I'll tell you, what's really interesting is that I've worked on tons of movies, and some of them have made way more money than Iron Giant. Yet the Iron Giant is the one movie that people have this emotional connection, or who come out of the woodwork just specifically to tell me, hey, that movie, it means this much to me. Mm-hmm. And the only other project in 30 years that I've had the exact same sort of response from an audience is Silver.
Okay.
And I think the common link between the two is that those are two projects that were created with a wide degree of freedom and honesty and independence. Although, Iron Giant was a studio movie, but the studio didn't care, and Silver is an independent project. So the end result is that level of freedom, and I think this is why the most honest stuff is coming out, and this is why I think people are responding to those things the way they do.
Okay, awesome. I guess your comic book Silver is volume 3 right now. Do you want to sort of maybe do a little quick synopsis of each volume and then leading up to 3?
Yeah. So generally speaking, Silver is the continuation of the original Bram Stoker's Dracula universe, and it takes place 40 years later into the noir pulp era of the 1930s. And this group of con men team up with this woman who's a vampire hunter to steal precious silver from a castle full of vampires, right? As people do. What could go wrong, right? And so in the first volume, you really get into this world. You meet these characters. Some of them have no ideas that there's such thing as vampires. So it's there through their eyes. You discover, the characters meet, relationship starts to form around some, this common mission at the same time with different moral ways to interact with the world. So it's full of fun, conflict, and character stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's the beginning of a big pulp adventure told with a very modern voice. So that's cool. So that's volume 1. And then at the end of volume 1, they go off on the adventure, and that's volume 2. And now we're getting into the world building of it, because they travel back to the old world, and so you get on the Orient Express, you get to Transylvania. So you really discover this world, and you see these characters kind of infiltrate the secret world of vampires. So that's super fun. Mm-hmm. And in volume 3 now, the wheel starts to come off the rail, because the people in the group have their own agenda. They're broken in their own ways. So the question is, can you keep this thing together and complete the mission? Or are you going to fall apart in an environment where you can't have any mistakes?
Yeah.
So that's how the story progresses, and then all is finished and revealed and resolved in volume 4.
Can't wait for that. And I'm loving how Rosalind is sort of mixed in the whole thing.
Oh, thank you. Rosalind, it's a passion project of mine. So one of our main characters and most popular character in Silver is Sledge, aka Rosalind Van Helsing. You can see in the back her face, right?
Yeah.
And so she's this amazing woman who's a vampire hunter, right? But at the same time, because she spends so much of her life dealing with the dead and making sure they stay that way, she's a little bit disconnected from the living. And it's basically a book about people. Silver in general is about people who are very good at what they do, but they all suck at life. And so Rosalind, this book, is it's her diary as a child. So it's really interesting. So you'll see it's drawn and written as a diary.
I love the artwork.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's so amazing.
And so it's really interesting because it's seen from her point of view and told in her voice. So it's really this kind of unique combination of extreme grittiness and resilience, but also innocence.
Cool.
So yeah, I feel it's a very powerful. It was very powerful for me writing it and drawing it, and hopefully people receive it the same way.
Yeah, it must have been sort of like you mentioned freedom earlier, and while I love the artwork and the noir feeling of Silver, it was kind of cool to see the just the randomness of Rosalind.
It's raw emotion.
Yeah. So
from fear to love to pain to resilience, it's all raw emotion.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I appreciate you taking on taking the time.
Always great talking to you.
Yeah, and I know you have a long line growing over here, so I won't keep you from them. So I hope to have you on again.
Yes, anytime.
I can't wait for Volume 4 to come out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm just going to jump in. So my name is Stephan Franck, and about 20 years ago I had the good fortune to get to work on the Iron Giant as a supervising animator. And the one thing I'm going to say is that when we were making this movie, we really had the feeling that we were doing something a little bit special, that was pushing the envelope and like going down a new road for animation. And then the movie came out and it was not immediately a hit. So we're like, okay, I guess it was just us. But then 20 years later, I'm looking at this room and I know it was not just us. It was what we were feeling. I'm so glad that people are feeling the same way now. So there you go. So the way I like to do this panel is I'm just going to give you a little bit of my background and tell you how I got involved with the Iron Giant and how the movie kind of came to be. But very quickly, I'm just going to open up to questions and we'll take it from there because I know that people have a lot of questions. So yeah, about 20 years ago, I was working at Warner Brothers feature animation. I just recently moved from France and was working on a movie. Like the first movie that we did at Warner's was a movie called Quest for Camelot, and which turned out not to be a hit. And the studio was not super excited about doing more animation. But then, they pretty much had everybody still, under contract, and the studio still under contract for 1 year. So they pretty much, like, well, what do we have? Who do we have? Turns out there was this guy named Brad Bird. And so he pitched his take on the Iron Giant, and the studio was like, yeah, whatever, just, do whatever. And just turn off the light, the keys in the mailbox when you guys are done. And which gave us a lot of freedom to make really the movie that Brad wanted. And so the way I got involved is I was working on Quest, and so a lot of us did not know Brad Bird. He had worked on The Simpsons, and so we knew, okay, there's this new guy coming from The Simpsons. We don't really know, is he about feature animation? Is he about TV? Who is this guy? We didn't know who he was, and he was working on this secret project. And like every week he was going to the dailies to look at the animation from Quest for Camelot and kind of see what he liked, what he didn't like. And so, one by one we'd get calls, hey, do you want to come and meet with Brad and stuff like that. So I get the call, I was a supervising animator on Quest, and so I get the call, I came to meet with Brad and Tony Fucilli, who was the head of animation. And the first thing I told Brad when I met him is like, dude, I've been cursing your name since I was 13 years old. And he was like, wait, what are you talking about? And I was like, well, I've been doing animation since literally I was a little kid. And I always loved comics and animation, which is what I do now. I still do comics and animation. And like when I was 13 years old, I decided to do this animated version of my favorite comic at the time, which was The Spirit by Will Eisner. So I did this whole short film, and it was in the old days, and so one day I go to the public library, which is the only place I could get any sort of information on animation, and there was this one magazine that came out like once every 8 months or whatever, and they had this little news item in there that said, there's some guy named Brad Bird, is going to do an animated movie of the Spirit. And I was 13, I was like, how dare you, that's my movie, who the hell did you are, right? So I didn't know anything about Brad, but then 20 years later, right, I met this guy, and the name I stuck with like, is this director still my movie? So I told him, and we bonded over our love for the spirit and that kind of stuff. But which also brings me to why I was so, because the thing is, here's what happened. So I had the meeting with Brad, and then at some point we got invited to go to the theater and watch his first cut of the first act of the movie on story reels. And I saw the movie and I was blown away. And the reason for that is because, of course, it was all the stuff that I always loved, all the 50s, the Cold War spy stuff, by way of the X-Files almost. So that was really, really exciting. But most importantly, it's like I've been doing animation literally since I was 6 years old. So I love the art form. But sometimes, honestly, I feel like animated movies are kind of hard to take because there's so much tropes to them, right? And so for the first time, I saw a feature animated movie that not only touched on the subjects and themes that I was passionate about, but also I felt like it was not an animated movie. It was a movie that just happened to be animated. And that trickled down to every aspect of the creation of this movie. And that was why I feel like not only did I learn so much from Brad working with him, but also just it was a touchstone in my professional experience and experience in general. So that's all like the talking I want to do at first. And I know you guys are going to have a lot of questions on the Iron Giant, so I'm just going to open it up to questions and we'll take it from there. But I can't see anyone. So.
Hi, wow, that got really loud. Okay. Hi there, thank you for coming today. I just want to thank you for all of your contributions, including like with Balto, How to Train Your Dragon, Space Jam. You are awesome. Thank you so much for contributing to my childhood.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just going to jump in there and I'm going to say that How to Train Your Dragon is a movie that I have absolutely nothing to do with.
Oh, really? I remember on your IMDb it says
I know, it
keeps
showing up 3 times. I had to take it out. But the reason why is because I worked on it for I was doing something else for DreamWorks, and I was I had 2 weeks left, and I thought they were going to okay, we'll pay you your 2 weeks, just go home. And they said, no, actually, we have a sequence for you. So I worked on it. It was even not the final version of the movie. So I mean, I'm just for the record, I'm just saying I can't take credit for that wonderful movie.
I was just thank you. I had a question. So with this kind of rising kind of resurgence of Iron Giant, and I've been seeing other revivals taking place, do you think there would ever be hopes of a sequel or it coming back?
It's very hard to know. I mean, I don't work at Warner Brothers anymore, so I don't have any inside info on this. The reality with the Iron Giant is that it's always been sort of an orphan project. And I'm going to answer your question in a roundabout way, so you understand the context for my answer. A lot of people will say, oh, it's too bad that Warner Brothers didn't promote that movie, they didn't care about it when it came out, and it was really a lot of people missed out on seeing it in the theaters back then. And the reality is that the reason they didn't care is the only reason that movie exists at all. Because had they cared in the least, we would have made Quest for Camelot #2. Seriously, so it was really a situation where they didn't care anymore. They knew they had one more movie that needed to get made, and they were there. So their lack of involvement in it is why it is at all, let alone why it is the way it is. So we have to take the good with the bad. But that being said, over the years, it's really interesting how so many people have found this movie, and it's becoming such a big emotional touchstone for so many families, and yet Warner's never feel like they really, fell in love with it and really push it, But I think it's because in the big studios, big corporations, it's still about people, and people champion their own projects. So that project for 20 years was like an orphan project that no one really sort of took charge of. But my hunch, and again, I know nothing, is with Ready Player One, that's obviously such a huge deal, and apparently I've not seen the movie, but apparently there's a big presence in it. So maybe then somebody at Warner will go, okay, you know what, now I'm taking this under my wing and I'm going to champion this property and just do more with it. But until that happens, something like that happens, then projects already move forward. But I think there's a good shot now, but I don't have any insight info. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah? Hi. With the amount of free creativity you had on the project without Warner Brothers overseeing it, how much time was spent on, or how much time is spent on the transition from the draft boards of the animation and the character appearances to the sketching to the final cut?
Yeah, it was actually a very quick turnaround. The entire movie was done in a year or less. I think the animation itself was done in something like 9 months, which is, for a 2D animated movie at that time was really, really short and really, really intense. And also, this was the first time where you really had CG, because CG was really new at the time, right? I mean, and so you had movies that were full CG, like I think Quest for Camelot, Toy Story, nothing to do with Toy Story had come out at the time already, so that, and even like movies like Anastasia, had CG element, but they weren't really well integrated. They feel like they were like learning a little bit. So very early, Brad wanted to make sure that we took advantage of CG for the giant, and also for vehicles and that kind of stuff, but that it would be completely integrated in the image. So the choice, was to render, instead of rendering it as a volume, it was toon rendered with lines so that it fit better into the animation. But what was really interesting too is that it was still the beginning of CG, so 2D animators didn't know how to use CG, and a lot of the CG people were still technical people who didn't really know how to put sequences together and stuff like that. So there was a very interesting, learning curve from these two groups of people who learned to work together on this. Actually, I was supervising the first sequence that came in production that had Hogarth and the giant. That was the sequence when he's trying to get the giant to fix the train tracks before the train comes in. And so it was very funny. I didn't work on the boards for the movie. I just worked on animation. But the sequence went from storyboards to CG. To the technical director's CG layouts, and when the sequence came back, I started to look at when you do work in 2D animation, it's all about folders full of drawings, so you open those folders, and I was like looking at those shots, and I feel like, oh, they're not cut. That doesn't cut. What is this sequence, right? And so I called in Brad, and we looked at everything, and it turns out that the CG tech guys had just ever so slightly changed everything, just ever so slightly, but the combination was like the sequence was not cutting together. So we called them in and said, hey guys, just so you know, this is what we're looking for, da da da. And very quickly everybody got on the same page. But it was really interesting because we were all learning. People who knew the tools were learning the new language, and people who knew the language were learning the tools. So it was a very interesting learning process for everybody. Thank you.
Hello. I was wondering how you felt about the reception to the movie nowadays, particularly with the prominence of the character in Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One.
Yeah. So like my jokey way to tell about this is that if I had a nickel for every person who's ever told me this is their favorite movie, I could pay for the sequel myself. So it goes back to the thing I was saying earlier, is that I love animation. I feel like it's one of the most powerful art forms really in the history of the world. It has the magic of cinema, but also the appeal and universal connectedness of drawing. I think it's incredible, right? But again, the range of movies that you are allowed to do, and even still to this day, but it's opening up a lot now. But really back then, in animation, especially in the Western world, was very, very limited. So it was very frustrating for us artists that were like, all right, so for the rest of my life, I'm going to do like, singing fish, and it's just like, as much as I love singing fish, this is not what I had in mind when I was 6 years old and I wanted to do, heavy metal, or I don't know. Or even, movies like Blade Runner or even Star Wars, things that I was like, this is so cool, why can't we do this in animation? So when we were doing Giant, we really felt like, oh my God, we busted the doors open, this is, Brad really thought that it was going to turn around the industry, immediately, and it didn't. like I said, because the studio really did not promote the movie at all, but I think in the least they really dumped the movie. But again, looking back, I feel like the studios are really the only ones who missed out on this movie because audiences have found it. And like I said, the fact that people feel the specialness and the kind of like the shared humanity and the honesty that, I think that's a good word, is the honesty that we put in the movie. And especially if people are interested, we can talk later about animation itself and how we animated those characters and how it was completely different from anything else we had animated so far. There was an honesty in the performance that I think is what people respond to. And so, yeah, you know, when people tell me it's my favorite movie or it meant this for me, and it's just, it never gets old for me because I feel like this is why we do this, you know.
Hello, my name is Veronica.
Hi.
And, you know, when the movie came out 20 years ago, you know, I didn't watch it. I wasn't old enough to watch it or remember it. But as I see it as an adult, I don't remember the mention of Iron Giant coming back into the public view until, you know, the recent Ready Player One movie. And do you think it was just that movie that caused people to be like, oh yeah, that was a great movie, you know, we should look back into it? Or do you think there was something else that sparked people to become interested in reflecting on the movie again?
Yeah, you know, it's there's this really, you know, like doing conventions because I do comics. I do a comic series called Silver, so I do a lot of conventions all around the country. So I go to a lot of different towns and meet a lot of people one-on-one as they come to the booth. And sometimes I want to talk about the comics, sometimes I want to talk about the Iron Giant. And the funny thing when I meet all these families. Is that everyone's like, well, we have this family secret almost. It's this one movie no one else knows about, but it's so special to us. And it turns out it's everybody. It's the Iron Giant is everybody's just like the giant, you know, is like Hogarth's secret magical friend. I feel like the movie is every family's secret movie friend. You know what I mean? So it's incredible how, this is why I can't really understand. I can't understand. But how it stayed under the studio radar, and they did not understand until now the phenomenon that they had on their hands, right? Because it was at the grassroots level, you know. But you know, I'm going to tell you, for me, I mean, I've been working for the studios for 30 years and stuff, and I feel like when I started to do comics also, or go back to comics and go to conventions and actually meet people one-on-one or 100 by 100 or whatever it is, but like really, you know, it changed my relationship with story entirely. Because before that, from the studio point of view, it's numbers. Oh, the movie made so and so much money, 40 million, 100 million, 7 billion, whatever. It's just a number. At first, you don't see any of that money, so it's very abstract. But B, it's just a number, it doesn't mean anything. But when you actually meet people and they can share with you what the movie means to them and how, what amount of truth and connectedness they found through it. I mean, it completely changed, it completely recommitted me to why I tell story as a living.
Hello, my name is...
Hi.
Hi. My name is Bradley. So, in the off chance that a sequel to The Iron Giant does happen, and in the off chance that you're actually in charge of it, what are some ideas you would like to implement?
So, first I have to say, I no longer work for Warner Brothers, I mean at the moment, so I don't think there's like really, it's not really in what I'm doing these days, or I don't see myself getting involved in an Iron Giant movie if there was a new one. Of course, again, who knows what can happen, but I just want to be clear, I'm not playing coy with it. I don't have any information or, on any upcoming Iron Giant plans. But now the question is, what would be a good sequel to the Iron Giant? That's really hard because, I mean, it's a wonderful movie that, has an open ending, so you feel like the story lives on, but at the same time, the arc is complete. Hogarth's story has been complete. He's redeemed the loss of his father, found a new dad indie and all that stuff. So I think you have to do completely different. I mean, there's a million ways you can go, like if this was like a studio meeting, like, okay, let's pitch, there's so many ways you could go into. You could go, well, now Hogarth is an adult and he has a kid and the giant comes back, or you could say it takes place the week after the movie and, you can imagine whatever you want, but I think it would have to be something completely different because I feel like the story that as told in the movie is complete as it is.
Hi.
Hey.
I'm actually I'm an animation student about to graduate, and my question is, while you worked on the Iron Giant, are there any things that you learned about the industry or the art form that you'd like to share with us, and just any knowledge in general that you'd like to share with the future generation of animators?
That's a great question, thank you. Well, two things. First, I'll talk about the industry. I just remember one night we were working late on Giant, and I was chatting with Brad about our common love for the art form and how to hopefully push it towards more ambitious movies that didn't stay just within the animated tropes, right? And so the thing that Brad told me at the time, he said, dude, I just killed myself for 10 years trying to shove down the throat, that was his exact words, to shove down the throat of the animation industry movies that we're not ready for. Don't make the same mistake. And I feel like it's like, yeah, whatever. And I feel like I've done a lot of that. And I've done a lot of stuff in animation, but also there's a lot of projects that I've had with studios that come and went, and that just, you can get. Here's the thing that Brad explained to me, and it turns out to be very true. He said first, you start writing projects, and your projects aren't very good, so they're an easy pass for the studio, right? But then you get better at writing them, and you get better at selling them, and so you can sell them, and you can get the studio excited because, it's great, and so they get excited. But that does not mean that they're still ready to make it. And this is when you can get dragged into some patches of development hell, just because you had the skills to create something and to sell it to a studio in a way that is exciting and gets them genuinely excited. That doesn't mean the industry is ready for it. So as much as I hate to give the same advice to people that I didn't necessarily always follow, is that you have to be clear-eyed on, there's only so much that you can push the envelope in a way that the industry is not ready for. So that's something to be smart about. And I'm going to say that now the industry is changing, and with all the digital platforms, like what is being done in animation is much broader. So all that is changing, but I think the truth is this is art and commerce, and especially that's the difference between comics, right? You can lock yourself up in your basement and do your comic, no one's gonna stop you. But to make a movie, you need money. It's not gonna be your money, it's gonna be somebody else's money. So there's no way around the fact that you can't have them spend money on something that they're not ready to do, right? So that's something to know as you're getting into the industry. Try to not bark at the wrong tree as much as possible, right? But more importantly, I think creatively, here's what I really learned about animation. Is that what was really cool is that the way we did animation approvals with Brad, so we'd be all animating our scenes and stuff, and every night at 5, we'd show the scenes to Brad. So we'd have this room, a room kind of like this, just a little bit smaller, but we'd project, the animation test on this big whiteboard, and Brad was freeze frame and kind of draw his corrections on the whiteboard. So literally, it's like you had to be there, because once he erased the correction, then it was gone. So you had to really be there, pay attention. But what was really cool with him is that learning animation, and as an animation student, you'll know this, there's such a pageantry to animation, and like how the head turns a certain way. There's a certain ballet-esque motion to animation, the way it's very often done. You guys know what I mean by that? And so at the beginning, people would animate, and myself would animate stuff like that, you know, and Brad would look at it and was like, what is that gesture? What does it mean, right? And I'm like, well, that's kind of head turn. So he's like, it's like, no. No one does that in real life. That's just an animation trope. There's no truth to this gesture. And so what Brad got us to do is to really remove anything that was false from the animation performance in terms of just playing to the pageantry of animation as we usually know it, and really play to the truth of the moment, and the truth of the characters. So, you know, I feel like that was really transformed the way we animated these characters, you know, and I think a lot of people picked up on that and started to have a more natural approach to an animated performance.
Hello.
Hi.
What was your favorite scene from Giant to work on during production?
I'm sorry, my favorite, what, sorry?
What was your favorite scene from Giant to work on?
I love doing Kent. And in fact, I'll tell you that my favorite thing that I did with him, you'll never see. Because there was a scene, so it's now just a little bitty scene where, you know, Kent is like doing this town hall, is talking to like the elders in the town or whatever, you know, and then there, you know, this, you know, a lady comes in and says, oh, the train there's been an accident, da, da, da. And so that sequence, that little bitty scene used to be a huge sequence. I mean, not huge, but a big sequence. And in that sequence, it was so much fun because Kent was being jerked to everybody. He was there doing the meeting and was being condescending, was being sexist, he was being a real a-hole to everybody. And so it was so much fun to animate. So I animated this whole thing, right, for like, I don't know, you know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. I was just like, I had the whole thing roughed out. And I showed it to Brad, he was like, yeah, that's kind of historical, but I have bad news for you. You know, we need to shorten the movie. That scene is fun, but it doesn't really advance the story. We have to cut it. So there you go. That was my favorite thing, actually, that I did it on Giant, but it's unfortunately it didn't make it. But that's part of making movies. But that was a fun scene.
What is the most challenging sequence to animate?
In general or in the movie?
In 2D.
In 2D. I will tell you. I'll tell you two things. I'm not gonna say what is the most challenging per se, because at the end of the day, it's kind of all the same. You know, everything has its challenges. But I'll tell you what is the most critical to animate and what you really need to pay attention when you animate, especially in feature animation. Feature animation. The difference between this form of animation and other forms of animation, like for instance, you know, action adventure for TV or stuff. What is specific with feature animation is that the focus is on characters receiving and processing information and emotion. And if you look at, you know, the Disney movies, for instance, like classic Disney, but everything else in feature animation, but really the Disney movies is really what define the art form. It's all about characters on screen, having the screen time to receive a piece of information, and you can almost see the wheels turning in their heads, and then they react, they respond, they do something, right? And so, otherwise, it's just things moving, and this is where feature animation has, you know, like the old 9 old men, you know, their book, The Illusion of Life, right? This is where the illusion of life really comes from other aspects too, but from motion analysis, have the feeling like there's like rules of, you know, like I like to say in feature animation, the rules of thermodynamics have to be in full effect in your animation, you know, the energy gets conserved, the mass, volume, and so on. But really, it's like having characters on screen receive and process information to where you can almost see their wheels turning. And I'm gonna say one of the best animators, you know, history of animation I had the chance to work with a lot is Glenn Keane, and he's the master of that. And you really start to see it with like Little Mermaid. You know, why is Ariel such an appealing character? Because you see her trying to make sense of what's happening. Therefore, she exists as a character. Does that make sense?
Hi, my name is Meadow Griffin. I'm a
Hi.
published author and illustrator.
Wonderful.
And Iron Giant holds a very special place in my childhood. And your art specifically was very inspiring to me as I developed my own style. So
Thank you.
I want to know, how did you get into animating?
It's one of those weird things where I always, I mean, like, I'll tell you a story, right? When I was 6 years old, we had this coffee table that was glass, right? And one day my dad gets to the living room and there's no coffee table. It's like, what happened? Is it broken in there? Turns out I dragged that table, I have no idea by which means, up the stairs to my room, and I was using it as a light table to animate Tintin's rocket taking off. How I got the idea to do that, I don't know, but I was 6 years old, right? So it's just that when did I start animate? I guess that day, you know? But here, the thing that's more interesting to me than me having that impulse, because I think a lot of kids have the impulse to do stuff like that, was the reaction from my parents, which is that a lot of dads would have said, dude, what are you doing? This goes in the living room, right? But my dad was like, huh, well, I guess you're all set up to do your work. You know, do your work. And thank you for him. And that's something also that my mom kept saying as I was growing up and doing my various, you know, comics, animation, whatever, is like, you know, I'd say, Mom, we need to go to the art store, I need to buy sales, you know, and she said, all right, we'd go, and then she said, all right, I spent $100. Now you're all set up to do your work, right? And I think as a parent, that's the best thing you can do if your child is any sort of artist or storyteller or really anything, but I'm just gonna talk about the stuff I know, is to recognize that some people are what I would call on a pre-professional track. And so, doesn't mean that their work is a professional grade, but this means that this is their work. This is who they are, this is what they do. It's not a hobby, never say the H word. It's not an outlet, never say that either. It is their work. And if you can encourage it and not overbear it, because then it becomes your thing, then you lose interest. But I think that's what I think my parents did for me, and what helped my first, like, natural inclination to really kind of keep pushing in that direction. Yes?
Hi, my name is Luana. My father, who's an animator as well, grew up during the time of Giant Robo and Johnny Sicko and his flying robot. And when I was a baby, would tell me the story of a little boy whose best friend was a robot, who sacrificed himself, this kind of thing. So when Iron Giant came out when I was 9 years old, it was like all of my bedtime stories coming true to me, and it was amazing. Yeah. So that movie is like a totem for my relationship with my father.
Oh, that's wonderful.
What for you is the most meaningful aspect of the story of Hogarth and Iron Giant? What is most meaningful to you about that story?
What's really meaningful to me is that, I lost my dad when I was very young. And so, you know, like Hogarth, of course, was a very similar figure to me, so I could see myself in him. And so I completely understand. Like, for instance, I'll tell you, you know, when I was 10 years old, you know, my daydreams, for instance, would be, you know, I mean, lost my dad, you know, recently at that time, would be that, you know, I would sleep at night, you know, and fall asleep, you know, and I dreamed there would be a knock on my window, and it would be either Batman or Superman, right? And it would be like my super dad, and I would become friends with them. And of course, I read the book, so I would say, hey man, just watch out for the Joker, you know, he's doing this thing, you know. And then I had this fantasy that, you know, then they would become my friends, and they would come with me to school for show and tell, you know, and hey, it's my friend, career day, Superman, you know. And so, like, you know, the Iron Giant, of course, is the expression of that fantasy, so of course I could relate completely, but also the movie was made at a time where my son was 9 years old, which was also the age of Hogarth. So, again, going back to truthfulness in performance, I feel like I was able to connect to this experience of seeing him every day and how he would go about things, especially when he tried to be sneaky around stuff, and you know, it's just trying to get that performance. Like, I remember, like, around that time, one day I come home and my son was 9, you know, Hogarth's age. It's like, hey, how do you spell a homework pass? Yeah, so you know, just trying to get that in the performance, and you know, this is what you bring it from life, and try to stay true to just shared humanity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, I was just wondering, so like within the last couple of years, there was a special collector, or not collector's edition, but just a special edition of the DVD Blu-ray of the Iron Giant.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is that the most complete version of the movie? I mean,
yeah.
There's going to be, was there any material that didn't make it? Or?
No. So, yeah, so if you watch that's a great question. If you watch the Blu-ray, you'll see two sequences that were animated at Duncan Studio in Pasadena that are, one of them is the sequence dreaming, like he's, dreams about his planet and stuff. And so those are sequences that were storyboarded at the time, but that Brad wanted in, but the studio wouldn't give any more money to do it because, again, they didn't care about the movie. So they stayed as storyboard sequences, for the longest time. And for the re-release in theaters like a couple of years ago, then those sequences were fully produced. But that's it. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, there's nothing else in the vaults that,
Hey, Stephen.
Hi.
Just want to let you know I'm a big fan of your work.
Oh, thank you.
I'm also a big fan of the robots.
Cool.
So I just wanted to know what inspired you in the character design of the Iron Giant. Like, what did you base it off of when you were designing it?
So I have to say I did not design Iron Giant. The person who designed the robot himself, I did work on. So when we were early at the beginning, I did a bunch of viz dev on creating like the townspeople, like the general, that kind of stuff, which I kind of explored in a bunch of different style. And I went all to Tony Fucilli, who then redrew them in the style that became the style of the movie. So Tony's style is really what is the style of the human characters in the movie. And Joe Johnston, who you may know as a great director of The Rocketeers, Captain America, all that stuff, is the one who designed the giant himself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How's it going?
Hey man, good.
Awesome. So I have a couple questions. The first one regarding how involved were you into choosing Vin Diesel as the voice of the giant? And, and once you did that, if you were part of that decision-making process, did you have to tailor the way you animated the giant in order to fit his very particular voice?
Right. So I had nothing to do with casting on the movie. So I was not part of the decision process of casting Vin in it. What I can tell you from being there though is that this was at the time where Vin Diesel was just he had been cast in Private Ryan, which they had just done shooting but was not out yet. So they felt like, hey, he's the new guy, looking for more stuff for him and stuff like that. And so that's how he ended up, I think, in Giant. And but I was not part. I never met him. I was not part of the process. However, the way we do animation, for the second part of your question, the way we do feature animation is that you record the vocal performance first. And then the animators work off of those tracks because you're trying to work, of course, sync up, so that, but also to add something to the performance and work in conjunction to the voice talent, not just to mimic exactly what they say, just like whenever the voice goes up or down, you're trying not your animation just do the same thing because the voice is already doing that. So maybe, as you know, in acting, it's always the tension between text and subtext. It's always the tension between body language and what people say. So it's very interesting when you're animating from a performance is to hear what the voice is saying and try to understand as you're going to be providing the physicality of it, because it's just this floating voice, to know when the subtext is lined up with the text, and then you really, in a way, supporting the thing, or when the person is saying one thing, but really, for whatever reason, maybe they're trying to cover their emotion, maybe they're lying, whatever, he's trying to say something else, and then your visuals have to convey, you know, just like you're like, yeah, man, I really like you, you know what I mean? But your body language says something else, you know what I mean? So it's about trying to understand that performance and complete it in providing a subtext and a physicality to it. Does that make sense?
Yes, with a quick turnaround schedule of 9 months, was there anything that you were able to add to it to keep everything on track, to keep it quick? What techniques did you use in there that sort of helped move things along that quickly?
So, it was very interesting, which is that, yeah, we had a lot of footage to animate every week. And so we, you know, basically the idea was, you know, you would rough out, you know, if you know how 2D animation works, you basically just rough out the scene, you know, which is like something very gestural and quick, where you're trying to really animate it with really rough sketches, but really connect to the energy and the truth of the moment, really be in the moment. And then when that's done, so that can go very fast, right? You can just be in a moment and animate a long scene in a couple of hours, you know, but it's very rough, right? And then you have to go back and tie it down, you know, which sounds easier to tie it down. Like, now I actually need to draw it really well, make sure the volume stays consistent, that the character stays on model. So I'm not even talking about cleanup animation, where after that, those drawings get cleaned up with a clean line that goes into the movie. But even before that, the animators need to tie down their scenes so they can be cleaned up and colored, right? So, to me, I always had more facility with roughing out the scene and the moment, and I could turn that around really quick. And then the time down of it was a little bit more tedious and was taking a long time, right? And so they would often, you know, like production people would come to me like, oh, it's Friday night and we need like 200 more feet, like to be approved by Brad in 2 hours. Can you rough it out, So we rough it out real quick, those long scenes, and then we'd get approved by Brad, you know, 2 hours later. And then they would pile up in my room as stuff to tie down. And then little by little, we like look around, like the pile would go, you know, so I started to, and it was the case with a lot of people. So at some point we had to go like, we had this point like, all right, let's get real. Everybody stopped animating new scenes, tie down what you have, right? So there was like 2 really hard weeks where everybody had to. But that's really the thing with 2D animation, is that you have the challenge of creating a performance that really is true to the moment. It gives you the illusion of life. And then you also have the fact that not only are you acting, but you have to draw that performance in a way that feels the physicality of it, from the motion analysis to like the conservation of weight and volume, feels like your character's like melting. So it's very hard. So those are really like the 2 things that is almost 2 different hats that you have to have when you're animating. Thank you. Hey there. Up. That's it? All right, so we have 5 more minutes. Any more questions on the Iron Giant? No, we're good? Well, then I will tell you what I'm doing these days. And the thing that I'm really excited about is, oh, can we go back to the PowerPoint? Okay. What is this crap? It's not on my screen, so I'm trying to eyeball. No. All right, that's really hard to do. Okay. Let me take this. That. Easy. Hard. Now. Ah, it's back. That's me. Here we go. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff I worked on here in animation. I'm currently executive producer on the Playmobil movie, which is coming out next year, and that's going to be an awesome movie, I can tell you. Don't miss it. It's going to... Oh, thank you. If you know those toys, you know, they're amazing, and you know, there's something very immediate about them. You have toys that are very realistic, and you have ones that are very whimsical, and so the movie is going to be very fantastic. I can't say anything about the movie, but soon we will. It's coming up next year, I can tell you that.
So the thing I'm working on these days also is my graphic novel series Silver, which I'm very excited about. To give you, thank you. We have 4 volumes. The story's in 4 volumes. 3 volumes are out. The 4th one's coming out in September. And what it is, it's the continuation of the original Bram Stoker's Dracula universe. It takes place 40 years later into the pulp era, where you have a group of con men teaming up with this woman who's a vampire hunter. Rosalind is her diary as a child, to steal from vampires. Like, what could go wrong with that plan, right? So we have 2 minutes left, so I'm just gonna show you the little trailer that we did for it. And if I can figure out how to get there we go, let's see what happens. And can we leave the line of the sound on this? Thank you guys. Thank you so much for coming. And if you want to come visit, I'm at booth 813, so 813.
Thank you so much for listening to the Hall H Show podcast. We love putting the spotlight on some of our favorite pop culture and comic book creatives like Stephan Franck. You can find this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, I think even iHeartRadio, Spotify, and our website, hallh.com. If you believe in our mission to be the voice of independent creators, we would appreciate a rating and a comment on iTunes. And please spread the word on social media using the hashtag HallHShow. Peace, cheers, and please make it a point to visit Artist Alley at all the conventions you plan on going to this year.